Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Commerce Rewired, where we spotlight voices shaping the future of marketing, commerce, and consumer brands across emerging markets. I'm Mohammed Al-Lawati, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jose Sandaha.
Hi, Mo, and welcome back, everybody. We are very pleased today to have Beverley D'Cruz. Beverley is an acquaintance of Mo's from a previous life, but also a real strong and true operator in the MENA region. She's currently the franchise director / GM, right, for Costa Coffee in the Middle East, where she oversees the brand's franchise and retail growth agenda across one of the world's most complex and fast-moving markets. But before this, you have been general manager, Beverley, at Pizza Hut Middle East and Pakistan at Yum Brands. The first woman, by the way, to hold that role in the region. And prior to that, chief brand officer for Pizza Hut across Meta, so Middle East, Turkey, and Africa. But also a bit of a career path similar to mine and Mo's from Unilever, a few years there. And your career has really spanned many different countries, right? Pakistan, Sri Lanka, the UAE, Canada for a long time. I think that's where you and Mo met, and the UK. As well, you come from a finance and economics background, but you are in the CMO space now. So very excited to talk to you today. So Beverley, again, thanks for joining us. I want to start a little bit back at the beginning, right? A little bit of your story. How did you end up studying finance and economics at MIT? And what brought you to where you are today in terms of your career path?
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, Mo and Joe. Thank you for having me. So I'm Beverley. I come from very humble beginnings. My story starts in Pakistan, which is where I was born. I was a Catholic Pakistani, or I am a Catholic Pakistani, and that was the beginning of my story. I spent about 17 years in Pakistan, going to Catholic schools and having a great education there. And then I had this amazing opportunity to go to MIT. My MIT story is an interesting one where there's a story about try, and if you don't succeed, try again. I took my SAT scores and they were pretty average, and I kind of thought my dream is dead at that moment. And then there was a friend of mine who was like, no, you're going to sit your SATs again. That friend is now my husband. He went and registered. I remember sitting on a set of steps, just crying my heart out because my dreams had been shattered. And while I was crying, he had gone online and signed me up to take these SATs again. And 100 points ahead, I took the SATs again. I got another 100 points more. And that changed the trajectory of my life. So 100 points can change the trajectory of your life. And then I was faced of being applicable to be considered for MIT. And those 100 points changed the story of where my life went. And this one person changed the trajectory of my life as well. And I took the SATs again, got into MIT. And so that was my story at MIT. I went to study computer science and then realized I didn't know how to code at all. And I was like, what have I done? And again, you can pivot at any point in your life is the other moral of the story. MIT had a beautiful pass failure. The first year is pass fail because it's such a tough school. And you can try anything. And if you fail, it doesn't go in your transcript. And if you pass, it will turn up. And I think life should be like that. If you pass, they count it. And if you fail, it doesn't count. But that pass failure means a lot to students. And so I learned that I couldn't do computer science. And I was actually good at numbers. And I was like, okay, finance and economics is what I want to do. And that's what I did at college. Fast forward a few years later, I get to the work environment. And then I realize, I joined Unilever. And Unilever had a management trainee program, which was great. Yeah. All companies should have a management trainee program because every 6 weeks you go to a different function. Yeah. And at 22, how do you know what you want to do with the rest of your life? And I thought I wanted to be a banker and do finance and economics, be a treasurer for the company. And then I realized that was no discredit to finance people. I realized I was really boring and that's not what I wanted to do with my life. And marketing was fun and exciting. You made fun ads and you did a lot of fun work. And that's where I landed. And 20 years later, I was still a marketeer and loving every bit of it. But my finance roots kind of highlighted that I wanted to do more. I was always getting into trouble being a marketeer. I would ask all of these questions about operations and about sales. And people were like, you're the marketeer, stop asking questions. Yeah. I was like, I don't know how to stop asking questions. And so when I became the general manager for the business, I found that was my true calling because now I had permission to ask all the questions. And the general manager piece, I could close all the dots. I love connecting dots and I like being in roles where I can connect all the dots and not just do one piece of it. And being the general manager helped me do that.
That's amazing. No, that's a great story. Look, I do think it's interesting what you say, that the creative space that we all kind of got attracted to early on in our careers, but having that finance background, I'm sure was very powerful for you, right? Having a bit of that economics and finance lens, especially in the marketing space. So
Absolutely. I think it was my secret sauce, and everybody should have a commercial edge in the world today. I think if I was giving people advice on what to do with their careers, I'd say surround yourself with all things commercial,
Yep.
because nobody can take you for a ride once you know what you're
Yeah.
talking about. I think that has been what has set me apart in everything I do. And where I see people struggle is when they're not commercially sound. Good CMOs are not good marketeers only. They're good business people. They know,
Yep.
because really what you're running as a P&L of a brand. You're running sales and you're figuring out how the business is profitable. Making ads and doing media and doing all of that is an enabler to driving the business. And so if you don't know which direction you're going in or what the ROI is or what you're doing, then you're really not being a successful business person. And so that commercial acumen, when I'm hiring today for marketeers or anybody, I'm actually checking for commercial acumen because it's
Yeah.
really hard to teach. And so it's important to surround yourself with that.
Yeah, no, that's sound advice, Beverly. I mean, look, Mo's career and mine were similar trajectories, but he had the commercial side much sooner than mine. And this is really sound advice because I caught it a little bit later in my career. And by the time it came, I was probably in my early 30s, but it was, not late, but a bit starting to become late. So I think super sound advice. Look, at the moment, I mean, let's fast forward at Yum, but now also at Costa. I want to bring it a little bit to the Middle East and just kind of start with the conversation and to get more of what it really means to be an operator in this region. But given this Saudi, Pakistan, Turkey, the meta aspect, when you come to someone like you as building brands or a brand builder, what from a brand building perspective has to stay the same everywhere? What are you happy to let go of locally when it comes to just the story that you're going to tell about the brand? How do you juggle this region of meta, right? And how do you make sure that what the brand is activating or implementing locally is not too far away from, the brand architecture, and maybe there's a big idea, but has enough legs to also locally be a little bit relevant, right? Maybe we start there. Just what does it take as a marketer today to win in this multi-market? So I'd love your perspective on that to kind of kick us off.
I love that you asked that question. Just this morning, I was in a meeting and my partner was like, the UAE is not the UK. The UAE is not Saudi, and the UAE is not something else. The UAE is the UAE. I hope you realize that. And those are the challenges you experience in being a business leader in this region, which is you can't, even though they put us in regions and they give us a range of countries, one country is not the other country, and you have to be respectful of that. Not every market is the same. Consumer habits, culture, and much of what we do today is tapping into culture and understanding the culture of your region is very, very different anywhere you work. And so spending time understanding that, being respectful of that is how you can be successful as a global brand being in these local regions. You asked me what stays the same. I think the things that stay the same are what is your purpose and what are your values? What's your brand promise? What's your positioning? What's your identity going to look like? What are your assets? Brand quality, brand standards, that can stay the same. The things that vary are what's the menu you're going to offer? What are the products you're going to bring? We use something called 80-20, which is, okay, fine, if you're a global brand, 80% of the menu, let's be standardized. McDonald's has a very similar menu everywhere they go, and you want to be a global brand that looks and holds true to its values. So yes, you can hold your menu constant, but also what's the flexibility you offer? And I think the big word is flexibility. The same with marketing messages, cultural references. How can you be tapped into culture? You can market the same product very differently in different regions. What media channels are you picking? I manage Saudi and I manage UAE. Saudi TikTok and video content is the top selling media channels. In the UAE, search and the very basic channels is probably where I should spend my money. But how are you going to understand that? How are you going to make sure your budget isn't the same formula for every country? I'll give you an example, and I worked in many different regions, but in the Middle East, we, as Pizza Hut, let's start with Pizza Hut first, which was where I worked for 19 years. Most of our menu looked the same, like the US or like the UK. But then we also had things like a shawarma pizza that kind of goes after the local audiences. Stepping away from Meta, I worked in Canada. We had a poutine pizza. And I'm not saying 100% of your menu has to be the poutine pizza or shawarma pizza has to be 100% of your menu. But how do you know to the local culture you're in that is becoming more and more important. This region, we call it the region of oil and turmoil. When there's oil, there's a lot of money. And when there's turmoil, there's a lot of turmoil. And in the last 5 years, we've had COVID and we've had Gaza and Israel, and then we've had Iran. And the global brands have really stood out and, kind of stood out not in a positive way, but more in a negative way, because if you're American and depending on who you're allying, you can look at a very negative brand, and consumers are choosing brands based on political alliances today. And so if you're a very American brand and you haven't put roots in the culture you're in, you stand out. And it was very, very evident that some of the brands I was working on, that I had worked on, had put no roots from a cultural perspective down. We did a recovery playbook, and chapter 4 of that playbook was put roots in your culture, put roots down in the region you're operating in. And that can look like different things. It can look like community service. It can look like having locals work in your stores. It can look like how are you localizing how you operate. So there's many different ways to do it. That it needs to be authentic to the brand, so it can't be inauthentic. But at the same time, you have to be a global brand with roots that are going deep into the culture you operate in. Otherwise, you don't succeed.
I want to just tag on to that one. I think that's a really key point that we need to bring out, because when we were back in the day, when we were in the region, our goal was to maintain the brand personality across the globe at the same time. But I feel like, do you see there's more permission now to localize and be more rooted across the different brands that you're seeing in your everyday life?
I don't think there is permission, because people are still very rigid in terms of how you operate. So, and the rigidity is coming from, I will say, cost cutting and the way the world is going. The matrix structure is becoming very common in how companies operate. Both companies I've come from, one was heading to the matrix structure and one has the matrix structure, which means you have a global marketing team. Local doesn't run marketing. Global will tell you what to do. So I get it that from an economic perspective, it is more profitable for companies to have matrix structures, because then you don't have to have 5 different marketing teams. You can have one marketing team, but it doesn't always work on ground. And you always have to have a global team that is also understanding what local looks like, because that's where the friction comes. Companies are moving towards matrix structures and global structures, great. But businesses are needing more and more local presence, just because if you want to survive, you have to gel in. You can't stand out like a sore thumb. And you have to be able to localize in this global matrix. So the way we are operating is becoming very, very complex. But the consumer is being also very demanding in terms of what they want and how they want you to communicate with them. So you're going to have to find a way to succeed. The challenge is real today. Teams are becoming leaner. The work is becoming more localized, which means it's becoming more complex to do. And there are not enough people to do that work. But the brands that succeed are the ones that have figured out how to do that.
I guess the other factor is also you have a lot more locally homegrown brands that are so deeply rooted in the culture and the region versus what we had 10 to 15 years ago.
And many of the crises we've experienced have given local brands a complete opportunity to grow. They have seen that opportunity, they've tapped into it, and smartly so, they should tap into it, and they are succeeding. I think where global brands come in is brand standards, trust. People still trust these global brands because, hey, I travel all around the world, McDonald's or Pizza Hut taste the same, and therefore I want to be able to consume that. Trust is an important one. Local brands it takes a long time to build that trust. And there have been quite a few food safety issues where brands have shut down in the region, local brands, because they had a food safety issue. But you're right, local brands have had a great opportunity to come in. The challenge is their strength is not brand standards, quality assurance, all of those things that some of the global companies have spent so much time building. And we have an engine that figures out quality assurance, brand standards, sourcing of products. Local companies struggle and come up short there. But yes, the struggle is real between local and global. And local, if done right, can be very successful.
I want to move to the transformation side of your story, because this is where you really formed your roots and have a lot of success stories. Starting with your role as e-commerce director at Pizza Hut Canada. It was a completely new territory for you, and you basically taught yourself from the ground up. What did that actually look like, teaching yourself in a new space that you had no experiences? What did that e-commerce capability look like for you?
I probably will start by saying, if you want to succeed, one of the ways to succeed is take the job that nobody wants, or take the job that scares you the most. Those are the two advices I would give people when you're looking at your next set of experiences. And I was coming back from mat leave. Before mat leave, I'd left as a CMO of the business, Canadian mat leaves. And I was very lucky to have 12 months off. But when you come back after 12 months, the business trajectory changes and that CMO job wasn't available for me. I read that all things negative. The company doesn't want me. I'm not valued. I've gone from being the CMO of the organization to now being the digital officer, and there's no money, no team. Do they really want me? And I spoke to my boss, who I actually considered and appreciated a lot. And I said, why did he give me this job? Like, I just asked him very honestly. And he said two things to me that got me really triggered. And he said, you can think and you can lead. You'll figure it out. And that's what I believe in you. And his belief in me was higher than my own belief in myself. Here I was doubting everything about myself. I'm not valued and X, Y, and Z. And his two words, which were, you can lead and you can think, and I believe you will figure this out, was game changing for me. And this is now back to when was my son born? 2009, 2010, where we were still figuring out how digital teams should be structured and how aggregators had not even entered the scene. And it was just the very nascent stages of digital. And so I started at ground zero, and really that's all I had to do. I started at ground zero. I stayed humble. I figured out what I didn't know. I mobilized myself into a journey of learning. One of the things I've always followed in my career is surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. And that's what I did. I kind of went everywhere. I went to Google. I went everywhere. Everywhere I went, I'm like, wow, these people are so smart. I also took my organization with me, because what I realized was that this wasn't an evolution of Beverley. This was an evolution of the organization, because nobody was digitally centric at that point in time. And so I took the entire office to Google. I said, hey, Google, I went for a meeting and it was so brilliant. I'm like, can I bring the whole office next time so they can A, see how great your office is, because they used to win the best place to work. And then B, can you enable their minds the way you're enabling mine? Because if I have some ideas, it doesn't matter. If I can't get them on that journey, it's never going to happen. And so that was the best day out for the whole organization. We spent a day at Google and everybody's brains came alive. How can I use this in HR? How can I use this in supply chain? How can I use this? I'm like, that's the movement I needed to create. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just doing things as I went. And as I was going, I was mobilizing a movement of digital change in the organization. And all of a sudden, we were mobilizing forward and we were creating a movement of learning, a movement of we want to do things differently. After 1 year, I had unlocked a budget. I had unlocked a team of 4 people, but I'd also unlocked a structure. And I was like, no, the structure doesn't work. You can't have digital sitting outside the marketing team. It's not going to work. It's going to have to be part of the marketing team. So you can't have me sitting outside. I was almost eliminating my role, but I had to be honest with the fact that it's not going to work separately, because all the CMO and I did was fight it for money. And it was like, no, the CMO has to enable the money, not fight me on the money or fight me on the opportunity. We have to be combined. And so I created a structure, and there was no CMO, put the digital under it, and that's how that's going to work. And so I spent a year learning, having fun, and moving the organization towards a mindset of learning and change and adaptability.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the foresight from 2010, that integration with marketing. It's so critical. There's a lot of FMCG companies today, Beverley, starting with Nestle, where I spent many years, where it's been siloed for a long time. Just now, over the last 4 or 5 years, it's starting to come together, even within sales on the e-com side. So it's cool that you've had that foresight that early on the integration of it. But I agree. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, Beverley, I'm going back to the conversation we had earlier. And I think I want to touch on the nuance of being a marketer with having the digital and e-commerce skill set versus being a marketer with pure traditional marketing capability. What do you feel like you gained as a result of taking that digital pillar under your wing versus if you continued the traditional marketing route?
I think I changed the trajectory of my career. That was the one role that differentiated me from any other marketeer in the building, because I had been, in my mind, forced into a job. And today I'm always very careful about saying that. It's almost like the job that I don't want, I almost go take it. I have differentiated myself in my career. And anytime you can do that, gives you a step up over anybody else in your pool of people. And in our conversation earlier, what I had said to you was our company started looking at people very differently. The traditional marketeers were called 1.0. And then we had started hiring all these people from like Samsung and people from all the digital companies, because we thought that was the way to succeed, by going and hiring. And sometimes it is, go hire people from externally, bring them in and get different experiences in. And we were calling them the 2.0 marketeers. The challenge had been that we are a food company and 2.0 marketeers did not know food. The 1.0 marketeers who came from the food company did not know digital. And
Yeah.
the two worlds are very different. A food product, and we call it products on both sides, the food product and the digital product. The digital product is agile and can be created in 8 weeks. The food
Yeah.
product is not agile. It takes 18 months to create a food product if you're doing it right. From an idea to the point of when it lands in a store can be, if done right, 18 months. And
Yeah.
18 months and 8 weeks are very, very different. And how you work and how you make that happen. And so what I had ended up doing was creating a marketeer that was a 1.5. I was the 1.5 in the organization. And that really helped me because I had a perspective on both sides of the world. I knew how to do things in 8 weeks and I knew how to do things in 18 months because you need to give food that love. And that is kind of what step changed my career. And the 1.0s were getting less behind, the 2.0s were failing. We were getting rid of them in the organization, or they were just self-selecting out because we were too slow or we were just not what they had signed up for. And the world really is going to be about 1.5. And even now, the marketeers that stay in the very pure lane of marketing, that's changing. If you're very digitally centric, you're not going to figure out, because at the end of the day, unless you're working for Apple or Samsung where you sell digital products, that's different. But if you're going to come to a food company as a digital person, you're selling food. You're not selling a digital product.
Yeah.
And you need to understand what selling food looks like. And so you need to be very conscious of that. Unless I said you're going to go work for Apple, then you're selling digital products to digitally sounded people.
So let's go back to that e-commerce role. You got into a role, you had no experience in e-commerce, you built that foundation, and then you went on and grew that business to 50%. Walk us through how that happened.
Now, Canada is different from the US. I looked around across the border and they had a 50% online mix. I look at Canada and we have a 9% online mix. Only 9% of our business actually came from digital channels. And I was like, we can't be that different. We're like literally across the borders. What is going on? And it just came down to discipline, focus. My boss had foresight that he needed to build a separate team, and we probably needed that separate team for a year to kind of get that trajectory ahead. But there was a lot of taking stakeholders along. We're a franchise business. We run franchisees. We have partners. We have to educate them. We have to convince them what to do. We created special products that only were sold online. And when you limit access. So one of the most successful things we did was create a whole range of deals at Pizza Hut. They were only accessed online, which forced consumers into, and this is again, I'm dating myself back to 2010. This is 2010 when people weren't in the habit of buying things online. If there were only things that they wanted and the only way to get it was buying it online, they went and did that. And then we forced people into a behavior and 9% became 20. I can't take credit for 50. I wasn't working in Canada when we got to 50. I had moved to London. But I was at 38% is kind of where I stopped working in Canada. But if you plant the seeds, the roots will get deeper and the results will come. And so I planted the seeds. So yeah, bit by bit, it takes time. It takes time to build an empire. You need to win people over. You need to build trust. You need to educate. And then you need to get there. It took a long time. COVID accelerated all of that. I was moving from London to Kuwait to Dubai in the middle of COVID, and suddenly there was no cash to be had, and there were partners who did not have online integration. And now this is 2020. I remember somebody saying, how could there be no online payments in 2020? We were there. And suddenly there's no cash and nobody wants to engage in cash, and we are caught not being digitally savvy. When people can't see the vision and you can't see where the world is heading to, it's hard. But you have to stay determined and you'll get there.
So you had foresight and you were committed to it, and you sold that foresight, that vision to the rest of the organization. That's what helped you as well. Now, fast forward to you moving from Canada to the UK to the Middle East. You went to Canada as marketer 1.0. You came back as 2.0 even. And then what changed in the Middle East? What did you have to do differently in the Middle East that was very different from what you were actually doing in Canada and UK? What are the assumptions and habits that you had to let go to thrive and succeed in the Middle East or Meta region in general?
The scale changed. I think the scale, everything in the North America is 10x. And you're a global company. It's very hard for global companies to understand that scale change. The vendors and the costs that US companies work with doesn't work for the Middle East. Depending on the country, UAE, Saudi, Kuwait are the rich ones. And then as the country becomes smaller, Oman and Qatar are still rich, but the populations are smaller, the scale is smaller. And so if you're going to play some big US players from an e-commerce perspective in the region, you don't succeed. And so you almost have to change your way of thinking to say, I need to go and find local suppliers that can make the economies work. And this is where your commercial acumen comes in again. If my PNL is not stacking up and I'm going to get a franchisee or a partner to pay 45 cents per transaction, that 45 cents means nothing in the US and the UK, but that 45 cents means a lot on a P&L per transaction for a local player. And it can't be 45 cents, it has to be 10 cents. And the only way I can get to 10 cents is by finding a player that's based out of India or a player that's based locally. And I just have to figure out how to do that. And that's a lot more work. But if you're not going to be commercially profitable, digital is not going to grow. And so partners will not adopt it if it doesn't make financial sense to them. And the only way it makes financial sense is to work through the economies of scale to figure out which are the partners that are going to give them the best rates to adopt. And that's where global companies fail, because that one formula for all countries does not work. I mean, it'd be nice if it worked from a digital perspective, but big American digital players don't have Middle Eastern presence. And so they service you from the US, therefore they charge you the US rates. The timings are the US, so your servicing models are based on US times. And it just doesn't work. And so you have to be able to localize, and most global companies do not like that. And I know it comes with risk, right? Multiple vendors, multiple risk. I get it, but it's just the means of operating businesses. And I haven't even got into Africa because I managed Africa for a while. I'm still in the Middle East. Africa, it got even harder.
So give us a quick nuance on Africa and what made it different than the Middle East.
If I was giving somebody advice on Africa, my advice would be don't ever build your business there. Send your supply chain teams in first. Figure out how you can scale this business, how you can actually be operational before you build your brand. Because I've opened businesses in South Africa and I've closed more businesses than I've opened. And the ones I've opened, the cost of food doesn't work because we're importing stuff from all around the world. It's almost like companies have to figure out a strategy for developed markets and for developing markets. And I hate saying it, have lower standards. I'm not saying have lower standards. It's more like have varying standards for what it means to succeed. It is still high standards from a quality perspective. So let's take cheese as an example at Pizza Hut. Yes, we buy cheese from New Zealand and buy cheese from the US, but if you buy cheese in Africa from New Zealand and the US, it is not going to make sense. So the question is going to be, how do I deploy my supply chain teams to find a cheese supplier that get brand standards in Africa? And then I'm going to be successful. Because if I tell these countries to import products from these faraway places, it does not make sense. And then your business model has failed. So before you bring a business in, I'd say deploy your supply chain teams into the country for a year or two so they can figure out how can this business be profitable. No company does that today. Or we open a business and then we're like, okay, the profitability start working out. Surprise.
Yeah.
I think we need to dedicate a whole episode on Africa for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So for the next set of questions, Beverley, we want to tap onto your foresight, have more forward-looking view. So 5 years from now, what do you think the brands that succeed will have to do differently than the brands that don't?
I think if you were fast forwarding 5 years from now, I think the customer, and let's place ourselves in the Middle East, which is where I am based at the moment, they're going to be more connected, but they're also going to be a lot more discerning. And I think this whole formula that global companies come with, which is one size fits everybody, is not going to work. I think people are becoming more and more demanding of what they want. You talked about local brands. Local brands are bringing so many different experiences, and customers are being exposed to that. They're traveling more in the world. We're more connected through our devices, and they're just going to be a lot more discerning. What does that mean for brands? Well, that means that we're just going to have to be working so much harder to build these customers. Categories, and depending on what category you're in today, are not growing. The pizza category I came from was not growing. So if you're not growing and you want to, if the category is not growing and you want to grow, you have to steal share. And how are you going to steal share? You have to be at the top of your game. And so 5 years, if I'm fast forwarding, consumers are going to want to be digitally first, but they're also going to want experience. They're going to want to be value conscious, but they're also going to want you to give them the best quality. So it's like almost they're getting more and more demanding. They're going to be health and wellness focused, but at the same time, they're going to want to get the best quality they can get out of you. So there's a lot to think about of how businesses are going to shift in being able to give not only a value experience, but also give them a very, very high quality experience, because customers are going to know more, have more options, and they want the best of both worlds. They want an affordability side of things, but they also want a very premium experience. And how can you do both?
Yeah. So something around what you just said, just to build on it a little bit. So AI has landed, obviously, and I think it's actually a very positive thing for our. I'm not in the camp of this is going to take our jobs, and how do we? I'm more of, let's demystify all these myths about it, and take it on and use the tools that are now here to become better marketers, all of us, right? And so I'm curious, just on this question from Mo, what are you doing, maybe as a GM, franchise director, CMO today, to kind of enable and empower your teams to bring these tools in and to use them in ways that can improve their jobs? There's a capability building piece that needs to happen for these people. Like maybe you need to create now more 1.5s in the world of AI. So what does that look like? But maybe talk us through, like, how are you guys in your leadership meetings sitting around and going, what are we going to do? Because most of the conversation is, are we cutting people? How do we replace? It's turned into an efficiency thing. Whereas on the contrary, I think the skill sets that can be learned here are going to enable better marketing in the future, right? In this AI world. What are you guys doing, or what does a CMO like you, to simplify the question, think about at night when you go, man, I've got this team, they're not so savvy, but I got to get them there because we can't not succeed in this space. We have to jump on this bandwagon.
The favorite word of AI. I will start with a different angle to your question, which is, in the business that we're in, and many of the businesses we're in a business of people. And people are always going to want connection. They're going to want to see a human from a connection perspective. And I've seen this over and over. Pizza Hut said, hey, we're going to be a delivery-only brand. Let's build smaller stores. The customers were like, I want a place where I can sit in a restaurant and I can connect with people. And we thought the restaurant business after COVID had died. But as the world is getting more digital-centric, customers are saying, I want more connection and I want to interact with people. And so we're a hospitality business, or many of the businesses that around the world are customer-facing businesses. AI will enable, but won't take away from, they won't define the experience, they will enable the experience. And that's the difference to remember. In the future, customers are not going to remember that their drink was AI recommended, or their kitchen processes were optimized based on using AI. They're going to remember that their order was right and it was delivered with warmth, or how people made them feel when their order was delivered. Those experiences get delivered by people. So back to your question, where I think AI enables, but is not going to define. And that's the important difference to be. And then when you get back to the teams and you're like, okay, how are my teams going to get there? It's important to kind of remove the fear of it's going to replace my jobs. It's more about, how am I going to get more efficient? How am I going to do my job better so I can spend more of my time on doing the job that I love and not doing the parts of my job that are grunge work? And that's where AI can really help you. Whether it's labor optimization, how do I use AI to optimize my labor model so that I can deploy it more efficiently to do customer-facing jobs instead of all the paper crunching that we make our teams do today? Or from a supply chain perspective, like, how do I organize my supply chain world where it's automated and I don't have to spend all this time on inventory in the store, which every restaurant manager hates doing. Who would like to say I'm the inventory manager on my CV? Nobody. Everybody wants to say they were the restaurant manager or they were running something. So I think educating your teams by removing the fear factor that AI is not going to replace your jobs. AI is going to make you do the more fun parts of your job, and I'm going to remove the parts of your job that you hate doing. And then in terms of equipping people with talent, I think, look, it went back to my previous story from the Canadian perspective, which is be humble, constantly be learning, play with things. Between my two roles, I had some time off and I made myself the AI teacher. What was that? I went to organizations teaching them how to use AI. But it was as simple as, and I was teaching myself first just so I could teach them, but it was, how do I make an agent? It's not so difficult. You get there, you give them you go into Microsoft Pilot, you give them a few briefs. So I created a personal trainer. I told him who I was, or her who I was, what I enjoyed doing when I worked out, what I like to work out on. And then suddenly the agent was telling me, and then I was like, can you design my workout? And then can you design my menu plan? And then can you design my grocery list to go by it? And suddenly I had an agent that was a trainer. But it just comes to, trial and error. Try things you don't know. Be curious. Be intellectually curious, to constantly want to learn, because the world is going to be a world where you're constantly learning. When I'm going to sleep at night, my worry is that people don't want to learn anymore. They're almost lazy, and laziness is going to be the cause of being left behind. It's like, I kind of use this principle, and sometimes I don't. What am I going to learn new every day? That's hard, because I don't learn something new every day. But if you will just try and say, what's the one thing I'm going to learn today that's new? Every day I know something new. And that is just going to be the most brilliant thing. All of us will constantly be learning. And AI is one thing, but after AI, there'll be a next 2-letter word or a 3-letter word that's going to come from a technology perspective. Back to that job, I taught myself how to do it. I created a movement and I got the organization there. That's going to be with anything new that's coming. 5 years ago, it was performance marketing. That's all everybody was talking about. Now it's all about AI. But it's just about constantly figuring out what is this, debusting the myths, teaching it to yourself and surrounding yourself with knowledge. And the knowledge is now so easily available, but not being afraid of it and using it, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I think using it is the key. I think that's the key. You have to use it. I used to have a boss that would say, trust your inner consumer to me all the time. And I think using it is,
You remove the fear element of it. And just try it.
Yeah.
Beverley, on that note, this has been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. And this is going to be a great conversation for our audiences to listen to as well.
Thank you, Beverley.
For having me. Thank you so much.